Ignition sequence start.
And we are live with the Primas in 5,
4,
3,
2, 1. Hey everyone, it's Prima Jess.
Peace and love, it's Cindy B.
And this is the Primas Podcast.
What up, everyone? This is Eloy B.
This is Robert B. in the place to be.
Yep, and you got both of us right here on the ones and twos. And you know what? We're going to spice up the conversation today a little bit. We got a couple of guests coming our way, known as the Primas from the Prima Podcast.
Ricky.
So, the two lovely ladies we have on our show today, the Primos Podcast, is my sister Cindy and our very own cousin Jessica. So, ladies, introduce
What's up,
yourselves.
everybody? Thank you for that beautiful introduction, brothers. This is Cindy. How's everyone doing? Peace and love to everybody listening. We really, really appreciate it.
Hi guys, it's Prima Jess.
So today we're going to pay homage to the elderly. We talk a lot about childhood development. We talk a lot about when we're young, how our reactions manifest when we're like in middle age in our relationships. And so we wanted to also honor the aging process. And we wanted to talk about how beautiful it could be to age and how not to be afraid of aging and everything that comes with aging, like retirement. And we are going to get into death because I think that's a topic that is considered outside of your comfort zone, one. And two, we want to normalize like the lifespan and how to be as happy when someone is born, and also kind of, this is going to sound crazy, but be also happy for the transition of the next phase in whatever this is, the human experience. Or everybody has their own interpretation.
Yeah, Prima, I'm pretty excited to be talking about this, aging gracefully, right? In our society, it's such a negative stigma. So let's normalize this topic.
So our special guest, you guys have heard him before. He was our special guest during the co-parenting conversation. He's my big brother. He is a social worker in Los Angeles, California. He has experience in childhood development, teen engagement, male engagement. He has a lot of experience in organizing and advocacy. And thank you so much for being back. He's a brother, he's a husband, he's a cousin, he's a primo. And thank you for being with us again, Robert.
Glad to be here. Thank you guys again for inviting me. It's an exciting topic. I wanted to jump on the opportunity because it's near and dear to me, because as anybody in the world, we have grandparents, we have people in our families that are aging, and I think this is a really great topic for us to discuss. I think it's going to really resonate with a lot of your audience. So thanks again for inviting me.
Thanks for joining us. Yes, so everybody, we wanted to talk about, like I mentioned, we wanted to talk about aging and the aging process, and we wanted to explain it how we've explained other topics like fear, anxiety, the law of attraction, just sort of our very unique our unique take on the topic. And I wanted to kind of touch base with what Jess said. She sort of opened up and she started talking about how it's sort of a negative thing to age, right? In our society, we're told that we have to be young forever. And it's such a weird situation because it's going against our natural biology. It's going against the human experience. Human development in every stage is so beautiful, but we're not taught that in society, right? Like we're not, and especially if we think of someone like the elderly, where it's like, okay, they're no use to us anymore. And I feel that's how they feel. And growing up very close to my grandparents, it's crazy because I feel like the elderly can provide so much wisdom, and not just wisdom, but we should always include them, not like push them to the side once they're like no longer, whenever we consider they're old, that's it, they're useless. It's like, I know that sounds harsh, but I feel like that's what we do.
Robert, as an old guy, maybe you have some tasteful knowledge.
As an elderly, I think, granted, I think my grandparents are, somebody that two people that I are near and dear to me. I grew up with them from from infancy to adulthood. They've always lived in the same address. We've lived there as kids, and so they're near and dear to me. So um, I think in my eyes, they really made me kind of consider, like, wow, like, what are they going through? Sometimes I go to their house and I think,
Hey, I guess they're right. Senior citizens, although slow and dangerous behind the wheel, can still serve a purpose.
like, why do we rush them to do things, and why, and I really kind of look at them, and they're always at home and they're not really out and about, and they're getting a little bit older, and I kind of take that into consideration when I think about this topic.
And I wanted to ask, just sort of to honor our elders, is if we can start with, what did your elders teach you? Like, if there's one thing that you can, for me, the elders in my life were my mom and my grandma, that were very, very significant women in my life. And so I think when we talk about honoring our elders, it was like, what approach can we take to this? It's not just explaining, because everybody is so different, everyone's culture is so different, everyone's environment is so different. So we want to generalize the conversation to just explain why we should honor our elders and be respectful of them, and then sort of get into why they also behave the way that they do.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
what? Yeah.
In our culture, in our society, either you're a collectivist or you're an individual, right? And depending in our family traditions, how are we going to take care of the elders? And I feel like we lost sight of that idea, because I think in our history and history classes, we've learned that other cultures used to cater to their elders. They had a lot of wisdom, they would confide in them to younger generations. But today, I feel like we've kind of lost sight in that. And it makes me want to question about my parents and what's going to happen to them when that time comes, even though they're considered, well, they're in their 50s right now, but they're approaching that elderly stage, which, if I'm not mistaken, is what, 65 is considered like retirement for my parents. So it's things like that make me think about it. And I remember taking a class about the elderly specifically. And in that class, it made me think about 401k, things like that, like I've never been taught. Having a retirement safe for myself, which as a generation, as a millennial, is something we don't really think about. Because when I'm talking with my friends, we're not talking about, oh, how are you set up in 35 years? Oh, do you have a savings account, or what are you thinking about? And it's something that is very different than my parents, because my parents, when I get a new job every 3 years per my average on my resume, they always say, oh, did you roll over your 401k? And I'm like, no, what for? Like, I don't need that. I don't have that mindset where I need to set myself up for the next 35 years on money that I may or may not ever see. So I'm going to definitely want to talk about this topic, because it is a very negative connotation when it comes to aging in our society. So let's deconstruct this idea.
I think our society says that. I think our society says it's not cool to be old, and that's why we want to normalize aging. Like, we want to normalize disagreements and fear of different kinds. And so we want to normalize aging, because I feel like the message that we receive ever since we're so young is youth is where it's at. And once you reach a certain age, and like I said, whatever someone thinks that age is considered old to them. Because when I was younger, I remember us thinking before we turned 30, like, oh, 30, that's it. Because that's the messaging you get, especially for a woman. Like, God forbid you ever have wrinkles and white hairs, and it's like, that's such a beautiful part of the aging process, and we've turned it into a huge insecurity, to profit business. I feel is a big one. I feel it's there's a market, just like with everything else. And um so yeah, so I think, like, makeup companies, the Kardashian culture, like, as much as we want to avoid that conversation, it's been a huge part of the millennial culture. Like, they
And it
don't
goes
allow themselves to age.
and it goes further than that. I mean, I think throughout. I mean, I remember growing up and my mom having, those magazines. Back in the days, before social media, we had magazines, and there was this magazine called Vanidades, and I mean, it always talked about, how you can take care of your skin, how you can, avoid, those the wrinkles and things of that nature, and I remember seeing all of that. So this need to stay young and youthful and finding the fountain of youth is not a new concept. I mean, if we really want to go into history, you go look at, even the explorers were looking for the fountain of youth. So there's always been this thing where we've wanted to find a way of not having to age, or at least slow it down as much as we can. And unfortunately, now in the age of technology, we're looking at people that, they're putting their best foot forward with social media, showing us, the best bodies, the best makeups, the best of everything, but we don't get to see the behind the scenes of what it takes to do that. So regular society is looking at, how do I keep up with them? How do I keep up with that, that status and or those images, and it just becomes this forever uh look for retaining that youth, or that, that, that masculinity or that femininity. It just becomes really difficult. And I mean, we've seen all of these horror stories with, people getting, you know all sorts of surgery, and to each their own. But we've seen some of the drastic measures that people will go to try to retain that youth, and spend hundreds and thousands of dollars on creams and potions and lotions. And
I think that I think that you just made me think of like how when you age, you also not when you age, I'm sorry, when we're talking about remaining youthful, we're also exploiting, I think, with that message. We're using death, it's just like death is also something that's being pushed. Does that make sense? I feel like in order for you to stay young forever, and then once you start getting older, now you're starting to fear death. You're not just starting to fear like the process of aging, you're also starting to get closer in a sense. And I say that because a lot of us were taught, we're conditioned to fear death and being sick and aging so badly, because we see that in our environment. And so I wanted to mention that. It just reminds me of that, what you
Yeah,
were talking
definitely.
about just being.
Same, Robert. When you
and
were
it is
talking about that,
that makes it even more difficult, because now you have this, these two polar opposites pulling at you. One is that need to stay youthful, and then society pushing you kind of out of the way, and in a way just kind of putting you in a box. And I mean, when we look at the concept of death, it's almost like you've lived your life. It's time for you to go through its progression, stop fighting it. So I definitely love that concept. It's like two polar opposites pulling at you, and we're stuck in the middle.
yeah, you're right. And it made me think when you were saying that, the hidden message or the subliminal message to all that like advertisement is because, like Cindy said, there's so much uncertainty when it comes to death, and it fears, right? They use that fear tactic. Well, if you're young and beautiful, you're far from that. You're like way over here and death is over there. So I definitely feel like that is a tactic in some sense, because how else to make it a business, right? But utilizing fear is like what we've been talking about. And I think
And
it's
I think,
interesting, sorry, Prima, how like
no, go.
to go like on snowball effect with that is how women don't even like to admit their own age. And I think that's crazy, because growing up, I would hear even my own mom would always lie about her own age. And I'm like, and now that I'm 30, I own it with like pride. I tell people my age. I'm like, well, I'm so much wiser. I'm no longer a kid. Like, don't look at me like that. So I never understood that concept in our society where women lie about their age. And it just goes back to like that selling it. Like, we always have to be young and beautiful, and never will we say the truth about our actual age.
That's a great point about the age thing, because I've always been open also with my age, but I guess I started to become more self conscious of it. When I became a teacher, I would always introduce myself, and no teacher ever tells you, like, hi, my name is Mrs. Something, and I'm this year's old, and whatever. And I remember doing it, and I remember everybody just knowing my age, but it's because I wanted them to build a relationship with me. And so if I hide my age, I felt like, well, I want you to know how old I am. I want you to know where I'm at in life. And you know what I mean? Like my age has gotten me to certain places where it's like, you're a teacher. I wanted to share that so that, yeah, we can build a relationship. So it's kind of weird because you just want to know someone's age sometimes. And we've tied so much fear into those numbers, right? Because that's something I don't believe in, like the aging process, because I feel so young and great because I'm finally mature enough to know what I need to self care. And I didn't know that ever before this age and becoming a mom or whatever. And so I just feel like that's an illusion and it's another control thing. You know, it's another like divide and conquer. Like if we just divide everybody by gender, by age, by category, by species, by color, by this, by that, then it creates so much separation. And it just all of this reminds me of the book 1984. You know how like we're all conditioned to think a certain way, and even the book itself. No, never mind. I don't want to give it away.
Again.
I know. We're in a book club. But anyway, um, yeah, so we want to normalize aging. This conversation is about honoring our elders by normalizing aging, by seeing them as we would like to be seen in that age by our younger generation, which is with love and respect and inclusivity.
Okay, but today's older generation has been left far behind with the rapid advancement in technology. They need to shape up or ship out because they just don't want to keep up with technology like at all. And it was such a rapid increase in technology where they were uh like they didn't want to keep up with it. And I wonder how much of that plays into what y'all are talking about because it's just funny having to explain technology to people maybe right now in their 50s and up. Or is that too? No, am I in the wrong
No,
ballpark?
my parents are in their
60s and up,
50s.
yeah.
Well, Robert, how did you transition? You're in that age group.
You know what
I know what
Robert.
what she means by that.
He always says, "This is Robert's technology." Eloy, order me the lift.
No, it's because Robert, you're in that younger part of that generation, and so that's why it's like good that we have you on. Not because you're an elder, but because we're also a part of our own place in our generation. And I don't know, I just think it's really cool. And I also have a rebuttal to the technology thing. So go do your thing.
Yeah, Robert, when you came on, me and Cindy were like, we thought you were millennial, but you're not, huh? You're the last of generation.
The 1950s is way out of millennials, Jess.
I don't know what you guys are talking about. Look, growing up, my grandma used to have this cream called Tres Caras. It was this like butter that we put on our face, and that retained my youth. You know what? Just the other day, I went to the store and I asked the guy to card me. So, joke's on you.
Yeah, and I think, Robert, you're taking aging very beautifully. I want to be like you when I'm your age.
I mean, it doesn't. I have this chamber that I lay in every night, but
No, but I wanted to say the thing about Elo. You said like the technology thing and how they're not keeping up. I think in every single generation, you see the trend in behavior at least, and I like to study behavior. So there's always been something new that comes up. Like I can only remember as far back as like rock and roll. You know, when rock and roll came out, it was the technology of today. It was like, what? They're playing a guitar, or I don't know what like made rock and roll anything crazy because it wasn't, right? You hear rock and roll, what they considered bad, magazines, you know. So like, there's just so many. The radio was considered like the devil at some point as well. So I think every single age, because we have fear instilled in us, and because we're so conditioned to like whatever, fear shit, fear anything. Like in order for us to be able to control you, you have to have as many fears. You know, you have to be as weak as possible. So um, I think that's another way that you know, they're like, no, this is different to me. I'm not open to anything new. And so it kind of keeps them stuck in their generation. And so I wouldn't look at it as they don't want to keep up. They're afraid. They don't understand it. And it's unfortunate. Why don't they understand it? Because there's so many gaps between our generations that we've separated ourselves so much. And I think, again, that's a tactic that was done on purpose. Like,
I think the gaps, I think back in the day, that's why I said the rapid advancement in technology, because back in the days, you'd had the 60s, you got a whole decade to transition to the 70s, 70s, a whole decade to transition to the 80s and 90s. And then like somewhere in 2000 to 2010, it was still like a decade. But then, like from 2010 to 2015, that was a whole thing in its own, which was just a little short span. Technology went crazy. It was like iPhones and iPads, and everything was just needed to be faster. All these new apps like Instagram and stuff like that came out, and then they just started changing the way people viewed information. Now they got information in front of them super fast, and so people are changing really fast because now the whole world is like, well, what's next? What's next? I don't want this 10-year things to last 10 years anymore. We need things to change quickly. And so it's just like this was the first time we had such a rapid advancement in technology, you know?
You know what put it into perspective for me? Like, remember that comedy that you showed me a couple months ago about this guy that came to our country? He was like Asian. I think he was Asian, and he talked about like the mass, like how we, but as we how we as a society are wasteful here in the United States. And this guy talked about how you were he was talking about how we wanted things faster and every time even faster. And I can't remember the comedian, but
What's the
he
comedian, Eloy?
he's looking it up.
Oh,
His name was Ronnie Trang. Ronnie Chung. Ronnie Chung. It's on Netflix. A special. I think it's called like an Asian destroys America or something like that, or shits all
yeah,
over America.
because you showed it to me too, and
Oh yeah, yeah.
it's a great, yeah,
And I think
Robert.
Yeah,
that,
he has this funny joke about Amazon where he's like, I want it now. And then he's like, I have to wait till tomorrow. And then he's like, why isn't it in my hand now? And he's like, from the moment I click purchase, I want it to magically appear. And it's like,
I
that's what
want
Americans have come to.
and it appear. And then he just kind of like, it's funny, but that's how we are as a society. Like I can't imagine us every day saying, I'm gonna write with on pen and paper and send somebody a letter in the mail. Like that just will not happen. People will not take the time to sit down. I mean, it's hard enough for us to take notes. And we need to really be able to take that into consideration when we look at older generations. I think you're onto something, Elo, with that leap in technology. So we've left, our elders in the dust in when it comes to technology. So it's really important that for me, what it's done, being able to be around my grandparents and see their, you know, them age, and for me it's gracefully. I mean, I see certain things like they argue all the time. One watches television in the bedroom and the other one in the living room, and they're constantly one-upping each other with the volume to the point that none of them can hear what they're listening to. But it's, it's kind of like who has the last word with them. And then at the end of the day, my grandpa's, his Spanish Jerry Springer's over, and he goes to the living room and watches soap opera with them, and all is good in the world. And so it's really, it's, if you can just be a fly on the wall and look at this stuff, it's, it really reminds you to be patient. Just go into there that you're probably not going to get a lot of stuff done, but you got to enjoy your grandparents, and you got to enjoy anybody. I mean, my mom, she lives in Colorado, but it is a thing that, people want instant, like, okay, I'm going to go help you. I'm going to go run errands with you. We got to do all 15 things in like 30 minutes. I mean, it takes them at least, 5-10 minutes to get in the car, get out of the car, I mean, they're not running, they're not sprinters anymore. And so you really have to kind of start your day with that mentality that we have to be patient. We have to really be able to walk in their shoes and what they're going through and let them feel like they're contributing. We're running errands for them. It's not about, we're not running the errands for ourselves. If not, ask for the list and do it for them. If it's really about the task itself, it's, to me, I've just made it more of, I'm going to go out with them. I'm going to, take them out to dinner. If we're going to run errands, it's really about the experience of how their day went. And it's
Jess, why do you hate old people?
It makes me, after taking that class, it made me think about my own parents. And
What class?
So you do hate old people because you're not denouncing that.
It was aging of psychology, just that. So we primarily focused on retirement. So we talked about having a will, like for ourselves, and it just made us think about things that I typically haven't thought about or discussed in my own family.
The advanced directive, I guess.
It what?
You did the advanced directive in your class, like who's going to be in charge of you?
Oh yeah, we had to fill that out and like a will.
Right, and I think that's what sparked it for me. Like, oh, this aging thing is really difficult because you're giving the responsibility of you while you're still alive to another person, economically, medically, how you're gonna be buried. I mean, it's separate from a will. I'm sorry, but and I've done those in my internships, and that I think really kind of opened my eyes to what aging really was. I mean, you're literally still alive, and you're giving your responsibility for your well-being to someone else. I mean, that's
Yeah,
a hard thing to swallow.
exactly. And then I had to do an interview in a convalescent home right here in Eagle Rock. And that alone, I was like, even though my grandmother's in there, but because has Alzheimer's and dementia. So my grandmother lives in a convalescent home right now, my mom's mom, for the last year or so. So I kind of didn't know about it. And then I went into an actual convalescent home. I did an interview with the manager. And not only was I thinking about like the living situation, the environment, but the cost to live inside one of those is the one I did was a very luxurious one. Not your average person can live there. They had their own apartment, 24-hour care, and it's things like that that I haven't even discussed with my own parents. But it, like Robert, it gets the ball going. You have to start thinking about these things. It's the circle of life. It's gonna happen to me. I have a daughter. She's gonna start thinking about these things about me eventually.
She
So
thinks
I
about
can.
this.
I think
Huh?
if you raise her differently, because
Your daughter
No.
thinks about those things right now.
my mom was like, I think my mom has that. I'd rather die before I get put into one of these homes.
No, but it's just
Mentality.
an idea. Like Robert said, like I never thought about that prior to that class. And it's not in my own culture. I've never discussed these things with my parents. I have no idea what they want for themselves. Even though they're together, they're still well and alive. You know, it's this stigma that we were talking about in the beginning that we don't talk about in our own families up until the actual event happens, right?
And I also think that's a very Western method like situation to tell someone that now you're responsible. That's weird, like retirement's weird to me. The way the whole system is set up is super weird. So when I hear you guys say that, it's just like that's so unnatural to think about these things, to make someone think like, okay, well, this person's gonna go, so like how's it gonna be? And like the whole burial business and the cemetery business is like, that's just a business. We've before, people didn't think of death the way that we do now, but because it was able to be profitable, then they pushed those boundaries, and now they have rules like people going into your jobs and telling you got to fill out these forms, right? Like you said you didn't talk about it with your parents because that's a Western thing. Like that's so American to, I don't know, white. I don't know what the word is to say that, because it's like, how about people who age have their own abilities to do these things? But then that gets planted into your brain. No, at a certain age, your brain, and I'm not talking about your grandma, I'm talking about the conditioning that you hear since you're young. That's why we're so afraid to age, is because there's so much that can happen. And I believe, when we've talked about karma, that if you think stuff, you can think them into existence. So my grandma, she's been saying that she's been sick since 40s, you know what I mean? And like finally, she's older now and she is. And I'm like, yeah, her diet, definitely did a big deal on her, and so now that's why she has diabetes and high blood pressure. But at the same time, she already knew, in her head, she's like, this is how you go, this is how you age, and I want to be aging, and so I'm gonna speak this language, think this way, until I'm sick now. And it's sad, I think, because it's just like, you don't have to age like this, but if we can separate you from the home, that's sad. That's another thing. And I'm not talking about your situation. I'm talking about the culture of, why is there a separation between these generations? In the Native American communities, that's not a thing. The elders and intergenerational learning is very important. There's so much wisdom from me at 33 learning from a teenager, which I love working with teens. I do learn from them. Learn from my 4-year-old daughter, learn from my mom, learn from my grandparents. And again, I feel like the system here, the American system, kind of separates us. It's just like, no, boys go over there, girls go over here, ages go over here. You know what I mean? This is what you can do and you can't do, just because that's what we decided.
Dude, Jessica must be looking for a home like within the next year for herself, because since I moved out here, I moved out here when I was 18 to Cali, and she's a year older than me, 2 years older than me. And since I moved out here, she's been telling me, I'm too old for that now, Eloy. I've been doing that. And I'm like, you're like 2 years older than me. Like you just started going to Vegas 2 years after me. And then every time I'm like, let's go to Vegas, she's like, I'm just too tired. I'm too old for that. Like,
You know what's funny? Jessica fills her water bottles with joint juice. That's what, and everybody thinks, oh, it's Gatorade.
uh, joint juice? What is that?
In
It's
my defense,
for your joints in your body. It
It's
lubricates.
alcohol and marijuana.
Oh, I was like, bomb water? I was like, what is that? That sounds
Like, I don't know.
gross.
jungle juice. I heard jungle juice.
It's lubricating the joints
shout
in
out
your
to
body so
Trojans.
that you don't creak when you walk.
Yeah. In my defense, Eloy was specifically talking about just partying, and I've been partying since I was like 12. So when he came out here when I was 21, I was like, Eloy, I've been doing this party scene, bro. I was born and raised in LA.
That alone should let
When-
you know how old you think you are. Like, I was partying a long time ago. Old people can't party, Eloy. We're old. We're supposed to
No,
just
I
die.
just did a lot
No,
of
but you just
toxic
get
to my
over it.
body. Yeah,
That's
like I damaged my body where I was just like over that scene. I was like, you just started drinking, bro. My liver tells me I've been drinking for the last 20 years. Get on my level.
Jessica,
I know. When I turned 21 was when I caught up to Jessica, and I'm older than Jessica.
I remember I seen pictures where her parents are carrying her at the club, and so they had her dress.
Walk of shame. Couple
Jessica
times.
put in her time. She put in her ratchet
Yeah.
time. She's
Four
I mean,
locals.
Yes,
I used to
like-
drink Four Locals before like the FDA like put all these restrictions on it. That was like That was-
Jessica. She's right
what?
for Four Locos.
It'd be
You
like,
think
it'd be like,
Yes, you think this is too crazy to do Four Locos? Nah, I think it's just about right. Let's try.
Jessica used to wake
Four
up. and
Locos
Four
is such a
Locos.
horrible situation, man. All of those drinks that nobody could.
It's a
If
good
you were
festival.
broke, you had those drinks, huh? Because
It's
it's
a
like,
good
Me and
well,
Cindy
festival
would
drink.
black out with like
okay,
2 sips. I'm just
Jessica,
kidding.
you would black out.
Okay.
But it's like, Jess, like, oh, Jess, let's watch the Laker game. It should be over like around maybe 9. And she's like, oh, you guys got to be out by 6 because I got to go to sleep. And it's just like, that's how old she'd be acting.
But I
Yeah,
was gonna say
that
aside
happens.
when I was in that class as well, I learned like this like crazy fact, which I did not know. So my professor asked us a question and he said, what's more normal for a kid who's like 21 to commit suicide or an elderly person? And mind you, right, this is like the elderly class. And I raised my hand saying, oh, it's like a shock when it's more normal for a young person to commit suicide. And he was like, no, like, and he asked me to ask the reason why. And I said, well, it's more of a shock, you know, like you don't really hear people like my age commit suicide. And he's like, no, but in the elderly culture, it's a norm. That's a social norm for the elderly, which I did not know. And no one talks about because it's like, well, let's just sweep it under the rug. It's not a shock because people have this idea that I think, well, they lived their best life. They lived a good life if they made it to 60 and decided to do whatever they decided to do. So I thought that was an interesting fact. And yeah, he gave us some stats and prove that. So I did not know that about our culture.
And I think retirement, you know, in the United States, like how it's like once you hit 65, everything you've been promised and all of these insurance and 401k meetings, it's finally here when you're 65. And that age was put in place a very long time ago when people were dying at 68 ish. I don't know the exact number, but it wasn't meant to, you know, economically. It's not working now because people are living longer, right? And so I've never liked those meetings because I've always felt like I'm not gonna wait. Like you said earlier, I'm not gonna wait till I'm 60. Like I don't even want to hear it. I don't want to hear the interest rates. I don't care, you know. And people are always like, but don't you know? And I don't know any of that language and terminology because I'm like, no, it's a business. Like if I have to do it because it's the law, like car insurance, well then fuck it, right? I have to. Big brother, I get it. But no, that 401k stuff, I'm like, don't you guys get, you know, I'm like, no, stop doing this. But so with retirement, I remember when my grandpa retired, right, a little bit soon after, right, Robert? He had a stroke.
Yeah.
And so we didn't get to see, like when I studied lifespan psychology, we didn't get to see my grandpa go through a traditional retirement process where he was really bored at home. Everybody started to bring him wood so that he can make like little arts because he was just like used to working so much. But what we did learn, yeah, what we learned a lot in the lifespan psychology is that after people retire, in that age group, that's all they've known. That's been their whole identity, especially men in that age group, because women were more used to, not that they didn't work, but kind of in that generation, they still were okay with staying at home. Not so many women were working. And so I feel like I understand, like when someone hits that age in that generation, how they would feel like, well, I'm pretty worthless. I don't know anything else besides this. It's kind of like when you're in jail for so long, like the Shawshank Redemption guy. Remember when he was like trying to commit more crimes at the end just so he can stay inside because that's all he's known. And so I think retirement also, what we've done in our society, where it's just like once you turn 65, you get your Corvette, and it's like I don't want my Corvette at 65. I want that shit now.
And Prima, that goes back to like what we were talking about, like that community, that circle that we need to involve all the community members, from the elders to the babies. And if I'm not mistaken, that's like Vygotsky's theory. And some schools are trying to implement that now, where they're trying to remove like the grading school, like first grade, second grade, third grade. It's like, no, we're all a
Really?
community. We're all this. And there's one right here in Pasadena that I was like
I've never
thinking
heard of that.
Who's
of enrolling.
Vygotsky?
He's a theorist in the sociology world. Maybe Robert, do you know a little bit more about him?
You brought him up, Jess.
I know the name. I don't know his theories or his.
So there's
But that's
also
cool though.
yeah, and there's also like schools, if you find them in the US, you have to look for them, but they implement his theory, which is like you learn from your environment. So there was another school that I think was super controversial somewhere in the US, where they would allow kids to like use nails, knives, swords, and these were kids. But then his theory and they proved it that kids do learn better from their environment, from the elders, like showing them, the older kids showing the younger kids, okay, well, this is how you use it, and not separating the kids like that. But he was just like a childhood theorist, maybe. He's with
That's cool. That's
Piaget.
awesome.
I learned him a lot with
I feel the
Piaget.
same. I feel the same about neighborhood parks where they have like jungle gyms. When I take my daughter, she's my only child, and I want to make sure that she learns to socialize from her environment as much as possible. And so when we go there, I'm always watching. She's 4, so she's still young. But she plays with everyone so well, and I feel like her dad also allows her to just kind of explore, like when she's at the park. And I just remember me when I was growing up in Cypress Park, you learn so much from the playground, from the big kids pushing you around, pushing all the little kids around. You know what I mean? From the little kids and the kids that you would see at school or from different schools. You just learn so much by playing tag. Like some kids are faster, some kids are slower. Like just the playground environment. That's cool that you said that, because it reminds me of when Peace is like playing with all ages, and I'm like, yeah, she doesn't have to find someone her age. I mean, if they're getting along.
Exactly.
In case anyone
But-
hanging around Peace is getting bullied.
But it's that idea that the older kids have that sense of responsibility that I got to show the younger generation, and vice versa. The younger kids are thinking, okay, well, I need to learn, or, I have a lot to learn from these older kids. And it goes back to our parents. Like, well, now I'm a parent, so I understand my parents a lot more from a parent's perspective, right? Like, I understand all their sacrifices, and that theory just resonates with me because I learned so much from my parents, right? You never really see it until something happens, but I think that's the idea. Like you said, Prima, like just removing that, like, well, you have to play with kids your own age. Why? Who says?
Yeah, or just valuing like our elders. I think a lot of us have played into the separation, and like technology, for example. We give our kids, when they're being annoying or when you want to just kind of have a quality conversation, like you give them your phone or they have tablets, and it's really being very patient so that when you are near an elder, to be like, no, like put your technology away, not because you can't use it right now, but because they're not used to that. My grandparents can barely see, even if I try to show them at this point. um and it's about, that's just not what was in their environment, but that doesn't mean that we can't learn from what was in their environment. Like my grandpa, he used to farm big time. He started farming as a child, because he was, I think, he was the oldest boy. And in Mexico, his dad was brutal. Like he I remember a story that he said his dad would beat him. So they would do this harvest, and then the next season when the harvest bloomed, if he did something wrong, like at 6, 7 years old, he would get beat over last the last heart. You know what I mean? Like I'm like, man, that's not even like I complain about my mom when she used to hit us, and it's just like that was a few months ago, right? Or like, and my grandpa, you know, so little, like you planted the fucking zucchini, I don't know, incorrectly, you 6-year-old chump, you know what I mean? And I'm like, what? Right? Like when they tell you their stories, you're like, anyway, and so yeah, so my grandpa is a great farmer. He doesn't farm anymore, but like he used to grow. He's just, I wish that I would have been, he would have been younger when I was still now, you know, so that he can show me how to plant because he knows how to grow so much. And he's done it all his life, and that's not even something he did. That was just something he learned as a child. But he also knows how to harvest in different seasons because he learned how to do strawberries in Chicago, and it's super super cold. Like the climate to be able to grow in cold environments. I remember he would tell me like it's easier to grow in places like California versus like in Chicago. Anyway, I just wanted to share that like our elders do have a lot of wisdom, and when I do get to see my grandparents, I do ask them about themselves. Like in that hour, whatever time I'm being with them, it's like all about them because I love their stories. They're funny.
My grandpa still grows chiles and
Does he? Oh, that's true.
a lot of that and I try to take him like different like desert plants which are a little bit easier to maintain. So I mean he still stays active. Like I was telling you guys earlier, he tries to paint the house. I mean he shouldn't be. And there's my grandma holding the ladder. I'm literally imagining this. I've never been there when they do it. Y ahí están.
Oh no.
Te vas a caer. Te vas a caer. Amasízate. Amasízate. And so I'm like,
They should not. They are not in this.
I mean, it takes him a month to paint the house, but I mean, he enjoys it. He paints the house, and he wouldn't have it any other way. People have, I mean, the biggest complaint about my grandpa is you want him to be away from the house when you're doing a repair because he's gonna try to tell you how to do it right. When you're a professional plumber, when you're a professional installer of something, my grandpa's always gonna be there with his chair. And people say, I can't. You gotta send him,
Send them
take
away.
because it takes an hour job takes all day because my grandpa's like, let me be useful, let me get you the tool. And
Like
so
that new Geico insurance commercial where like they're trying to tell you like when you buy a house how not to be like your parents. I don't know if you guys seen those commercials, and it's like this old guy walking people around telling them don't do that. Like, and then as an exact example, like what you're talking about, there's this plumber under the sink, and then this guy's like, "What is that? A Phillips head? That's a good choice there, pal." And then like the guy teaching him, he's all like, "Remember, you hired him."
yeah, but
Oh.
the difference is my grandpa, like the other day, he was like, he has the bed frame that it has like a little canopy over it, and he's like forever telling me I want to take it off, so he brings me a saw because he wants to cut it off. Unscrew it. Like he literally does that. I'm like,
He's like, tengo el serrucho.
no, look, and I'm going to his tools like as fast as I can, and he's over there with his good hand trying to saw it off, and I'm like, no.
No.
And I'm like,
Oh.
because you know what I've learned through the days is it's just like you gotta enjoy them. You gotta enjoy your grandparents because my grandma, I cut my grandpa's hair, so I became his barber. So he's and he can't hear anymore without his hearing aids, and so it's comical because my grandma takes that opportunity. The moment he takes those hearing aids off, my grandma's just cursing him and everything. My grandpa's
Talking
just
shit.
with a beautiful smile. The world is perfect. I can't hear
Some
you.
like groovy 70s hippie song is playing, and he's just smiling. It's fun to see you in the room. See the sun.
My grandpa's literally just there, just like looking at my grandma. He can see her because you can see her vein. And my grandma's like, "Eres loca." And
That's
Yeah.
funny. That reminds me of George Lopez when I don't know if you guys remember where it's a stand up bit, but the uncle's like having a heart attack, and he's like, "Go call your tia," and the tia comes, and then he's like having a heart attack. He's like, "Call the ambulance or something, take me to the hospital," and she's just like, "Oh, so now I'm important. I'm not fat anymore. Oh, so you stay with me because you love me, not just because of the kids." And like she's just
Winning
throwing it
just
everything in her
happened.
face, and that reminded me. So good for my grandma. No, I'm just playing, but
my grandma holds a grudge with my grandpa because she's always been the queen of the castle. And when my grandpa's like, I had to sit down because I was getting lightheaded. My whole life I've been lightheaded.
yeah,
And so like my grandma always one's upset. I was like, I can't see.
yeah.
Yeah, grandpa, you need glasses. I can't even see with the glasses I have. That's my grandma. And so it just always went up. And you don't want to get my grandma from Mexico, the one that lives in Guadalajara, with my grandma from here, the American grandma, because they're both one up. They're just sitting there. Ay, la diabetic. No, ya ni tengo sangre. And
Yeah, they just go back and forth comparing
oh,
how
my
much medication.
yeah.
That's the culture they came up in. Everybody used to always tell them, like that's it. Once you die, you get diabetes and high blood pressure, and then we normalize it in communities of color, and it's like, no, you can fix it with your diet, and if you move.
Had so many, like, the dietitians, and she won't let us go into the room when she goes and talks to a dietitian. And I know the dietitians aren't recommending her to cook with lard. We haven't cooked with lard since the 1980s, but she still has one under her stove. She still has a whole pot of lard under
She
her stove.
does.
Yes, tortillas.
When I used to live there, everybody, like, I used to live there during college, and she would still hide cookies and stuff, but I think that's the worst. We did not have lard nowhere near the house, so that's it. Everything changed.
I still think it's funny that my grandparents think that they're being spied on to this day. Like, they think people are going through their mail and stuff. And, like, if their bills are over, like, by $1, they're going to be like, where are they getting this extra money from? Well, let's take it away from them.
Yeah, and then when you go over, they're like, Cindy, I have a stack of bills that I need you to call them and see what's up. And I'm like, what?
I don't even do that
I
price.
I don't live here anymore, you guys.
I did.
I wanted.
And I'm over a penny on this bill. That's not right. Can you call them and fix that?
I have to pretend I'm on the phone. So I wanted to say that the National Indian Council on Aging has a very cool message, just kind of about how to handle our elderly folk. So there's a lot of studies that show a strong emotional bond with family often leads to healthier habits. Social isolation is a major risk factor for mobility and mortality in elders. Loneliness can have a physical and emotional impact on elders, and loneliness is a risk factor for symptoms of depression. So again, we want to remind everybody, we talked about how we should normalize aging, and we gave you a little bit. I know we were random and all over the place, and I just want to apologize in advance. Last time I apologized for my internet connection, and I mean it. I'm going to work on it. This time I want to apologize because my daughter was running in and out during our intro, so I feel like our intro was a little interesting. I think most of our intros, if you guys can get past the first 5 minutes, then you guys have some solid content, right? Just skip over, because it always takes us a while. And I'm going to be honest, I still get very nervous when we record, when we have guest speakers, just because this is nerve-wracking and I don't know how to host, and I'm still learning. We're learning on the job. And so, yeah, don't judge us.
Don't be so hard on yourself, sister. I mean, now that I get to see behind the scenes, Jessica, for the first 5 minutes, doesn't even know where she's at.
Jess still doesn't know her name. Jess, as soon as you click
that's
record,
what I'm dealing with.
That's who she is.
So, I mean, the blame has to be spread around the room, and I'll take some of the blame as the guest.
Thank you.
Thanks, Robert. It's really big of you.
Yeah, thank you for holding yourself accountable.
As always.
And we talked a lot about elders, but I also wanted to mention our parents, our tias, our tios, other grandparents, anybody that is older. Like, we need to hold the door for them. I feel we need to ask them for advice and ask them for their wisdom. Tell them that we respect them, that we appreciate them. And, like we were talking about karma, like, put out that energy that you want back, right? And so take that extra time, be very patient, listen to them, give them a call, be very prepared for them to do things very, very differently from us, and it's okay. And preparing for this also, like, made me think of my mom and how I need to be more patient with her. And it's a beautiful thing to study lifespan psychology. There was a lot of small documentaries on YouTube. If you guys have someone that's older in your household, or that you're close to, or that you don't understand, there's a lot of cool information out there available. It's not, you don't have to just go to the college course anymore. All of this information that I learned in college is all on YouTube now and on the internet. So yeah, I just wanted to say that let's normalize aging, and we hope you guys enjoyed this topic.
Let's celebrate aging.
Let's celebrate aging. And Jess, did you have any closing? I didn't want to just. Okay.
No.
Thank you to our special guest. Thank you to Eloy. Thank you to Jess. Thank you for listening. Please follow us on Instagram at Primas Podcast. and on YouTube, Primas Podcast. Tell your friends about us and share information. Give us feedback. Leave us comments. Let us know what you think. We would really, really appreciate it. Peace out. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Visit your grandparents.